Hi everybody, today we're going to look into how to draw a Lewis structure for different types of molecules, as well as how to explore Lewis structures in the case of dative covalent bonding. So let's get right into it. First of all, let's try to define what a Lewis structure is. Now, a Lewis structure, it's also called a Lewis dot formula, it's essentially a diagram that shows the bondings between atoms of a molecule as well as the lone pairs of electrons that may exist within a molecule. So it's essentially a sort of a diagram that shows bonding between atoms of a molecule, as well as the lone pairs of electrons that may exist within the molecule. So, for instance, let's try to draw a Lewis structure of a molecule that we know very well, the Cl2 molecule. The way that we usually draw it is kind of like this. This is a much more official and detailed version of how to draw an official Lewis structure diagram for the Cl2 molecule. And as we can see, we represented clearly the lone pair. By the way, the lone pair is the non-bonding electrons of an atom that's involved in a molecule, such as this. And these we will be calling the bonding pair of electrons. Now, although we can use this elaborate sort of diagram to represent the Lewis structure of the chlorine molecule, there's a much more easier way to draw this, and that would be to represent two of these electrons, a pair of electrons, as a single strand, as a single stick. So if we were to use a simplified version of a diagram for the Lewis structure, it would kind of look like this, wherein a single line represents two electrons. Knowing that, let's look at a couple of other examples of molecules. Let's try to look at oxygen, for instance, the O2 molecule. Now, in an O2 molecule, we know that two electrons from each side, from each of the oxygen atoms, are involved, so a total of two covalent bonds, which means 4 electrons are involved in bonding. So if we were to draw it out, it would kind of look like this, wherein the two outer sticks represent each of the lone pairs, and the two sticks involved in the middle represent the covalent bondings. And we know that this represents 4 electrons, aka 2 bonds. And as you may know, these are the lone pairs. Now, there's a much easier way to kind of draw this and kind of find out the formation of how the diagram and the sticks of the diagram would actually look like. And that is by using the number of electrons, the valence electrons of each atom, as well as the total number of atoms involved in a molecule, and using a simple calculation equation. So if we were to kind of try to find out how many sticks we would have in a molecule as this, we would find out the number of valence electrons for each of the oxygen atoms, and we have 2 oxygen atoms, so we're going to have a total of 12 electrons. Knowing that one of the sticks represent 2 electrons, we're essentially going to divide this by 2, wherein we get 6, which is representative of the number of sticks that we have. We have 6 sticks right here. We're essentially going to arrange the sticks so that each of the atoms can form a stable octet. Now we're going to look into a different example, and that example is going to be CO. Now this one is slightly more tricky. Using the same sort of method that we've used before, we're going to add the number of valence electrons for each of the atoms. And we're going to divide it by 2, which is representative of the number of electrons that one stick represents. And so we're going to have 5 sticks. Now how will we draw this? If we were to actually visualize this, this kind of comes out as different as you could have thought. We kind of get this formation, and this is interesting because we wouldn't normally draw an oxygen like this. If we immediately think of an oxygen atom involved in a covalent bond, we would kind of think of this typical formation wherein each of the sticks involved in the middle represent a covalent bond, and we have 2 lone pairs. This is kind of like the typical version of an oxygen atom involved in molecules that we would kind of picture. But in fact, the diagram structure that we get is this, and this is quite interesting. Now, this is because we get a dative covalent bond for the oxygen atom. And the dative covalent bond is something that we learned about earlier on in one of our previous videos. We get a dative covalent bond. And so technically the oxygen still has a stable octet consisting of 2 of the electrons that came from the carbon. And then the carbon also has a stable octet. However, the 2 electrons, this pair of electrons, essentially are shared unidirectionally by the oxygen atom, which is a case of dative covalent bonding, which is essentially a type of covalent bonding wherein the electrons that are involved in bonding come from one party or one side. So we get a dative covalent bond, and this is exactly why we still get this sort of structure where each of these 2 electrons are represented as one stick. So technically it is true that we have 3 sticks right here in the middle. However, 2 are just normal covalent bond as we would think of it. However, 1 is a dative covalent bond. So that's something that's very important to note. And that will be the end of our lecture. Thank you so much.